Number 1. The Aguadilla Object. On the night of April 25, 2013, a United States Customs and Border Protection aircraft was flying a routine patrol over the northwest coast of Puerto Rico. It was a twin-engine surveillance plane fitted with a Wescom infrared turret built to track smugglers in the dark. Near the runway at Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, the camera locked onto something it could not explain. On the thermal feed, it looked like a small, warm oval. It had no wings, it trailed no exhaust plume, it carried no navigation lights. By the estimates of analysts who later studied the tape, it measured only 3 to 5 feet across, and it was heading straight for the sea. The clip runs for roughly 3 to 4 minutes. The object crosses over land, then over the dark water, and then it does something an aircraft is not supposed to do. It enters the ocean. It does not slow down. It does not break apart on impact. It simply continues, now moving beneath the surface. And then, near the end of the footage, the single warm shape appears to split into two, and both halves keep going. In 2015, a group called the Scientific Coalition for Ufology published a technical report on the case that ran to roughly 160 pages. The analysts, including Robert Powell and Morgan Beale, estimated the object's speed at times near or below 80 miles per hour, and argued that its steady path through air and water was difficult to square with any ordinary explanation. Skeptics pushed back hard. They suggested a pair of birds whose warm bodies blurred together on the thermal camera and then separated. They suggested a balloon, a paper lantern, or a tracking glitch in the camera itself. Customs and Border Protection never issued an identification and never publicly commented on the clip. It is worth being fair to the doubters here. A thermal camera does not measure true size or distance, only heat against a cooler background, so an object's real scale depends entirely on how far away it is, and that distance was never pinned down. The camera's automatic tracker can also smear and double a warm target, which is one way two birds could look like one object that later splits. What makes the case so stubborn is that the strongest evidence, the moment the object seems to cross from air into ocean, is also the moment where the thermal image is most ambiguous. The footage even circulated for years before any formal analysis, which muddies the question of exactly where it came from and whether anything was altered. An Aguadilla sits beside the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest pit in the entire Atlantic, plunging to about 8,376 meters at a spot called the Milwaukee Deep. If something really did dive there, it chose the one place we would never get it back from. So what else have our sensors caught slipping into the deep? Number 2, the Shag Harbour submerged craft. For that, we go back almost half a century to a small fishing village in Nova Scotia, Canada. On the night of October 4th, 1967, multiple witnesses near Shag Harbour watched a string of lights moving in the sky. They described 4 amber lights flashing in sequence, and then a controlled, angled descent toward the water. Whatever it was, it came down into the harbor. Among the witnesses was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police constable named Ron Pound, who, with local residents, saw a pale glow and a patch of yellowish foam spreading across the surface. That foam was reported to be around 80 feet wide. This is the detail that lifts Shag Harbour out of ordinary folklore. The event was logged by the Rescue Coordination Center in Halifax. Officials checked and no aircraft had been reported missing. Within days, Royal Canadian Navy divers from a ship called HMCS Granby were searching the seabed. Decades later, declassified Canadian government documents confirmed that the state had treated this as a genuine, unidentified object report, serious enough to investigate. Researchers Chris Stiles and Don Ledger gathered the testimony and the paperwork into a book called Dark Object, published in 2001, and it is their reconstruction that contains the strangest claim of all. According to later accounts, the submerged object did not simply sink. It reportedly moved along the bottom, traveling underwater toward Government Point and the area near a naval facility at Shelburne, where, the story goes, sonar tracked it on the seabed before it slipped away. Here's the problem for any simple answer. The water in that area is shallow, only tens of meters deep. A crashed aircraft should have been easy to find, yet divers recovered nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no aircraft parts, no oil slick. The official file lists the object as unidentified, and the case is sometimes called Canada's Roswell. Skeptics have offered a meteor, a flare, a small plane, or secret military activity. But a meteor does not leave foam floating on the water for that long, and it does not send a Navy diving to the bottom for days. The underwater tracking phase rests mostly on witness memory rather than a preserved sonar trace. Still, the file says they searched the seabed, and modern navies, with far better ears, still log contacts they cannot name. Number 3. The USS Omaha Spherical contact. Fast forward to July 15, 2019, off the coast of San Diego, California. A United States Navy littoral combat ship, the USS Omaha, was operating inside a designated warning area when its sensors recorded something on infrared. It was a dark sphere, hovering above the ocean. The crew tracked it. On the recording, a voice can be heard reacting as the object does the now familiar thing. It descends, and it appears to enter the water. Someone says it splashed, and then it is gone. The footage was released in 2021 by filmmaker Jeremy Corbell and journalist George Knapp, and crucially, the Department of Defense did not dismiss it. The Pentagon confirmed that the footage was genuine, captured by Navy personnel. This was not a blurry photo from a stranger. This was the United States military acknowledging it had filmed an object it could not identify going into the sea. The Omaha sighting was part of a wider series of incidents that month in which unidentified objects were reported swarming Navy destroyers off California, including the USS Kidd and the USS Russell. After the sphere submerged, a submarine and other assets reportedly searched the area. Nothing was recovered. No device, no debris. The object, estimated at roughly 6 feet across, had simply left through the bottom of the world. An official investigation considered whether these were drones. It is a reasonable thought. But no operator was ever found, no craft was ever recovered, and no identification was ever made public. In 2021, a preliminary government assessment told Congress that most of these incidents simply lacked the data to be explained. Skeptics still argue the sphere could have been a balloon or a drone flying low, and that the splash was misread on the infrared. Supporters point to the radar tracking and the coordinated multi-ship nature of the encounters, and argue that a stray balloon does not behave like that. What is not in dispute is that this happened in instrumented training waters, under unusually good sensor coverage, and that no public sonar trace of the submerged object has ever been released. The water kept the answer again. But not every mystery is an object. Some are sounds, and they can travel for thousands of miles before anyone hears them. Number 4. The Cape Leeuwin Icequake pulses. Scattered around the planet is a network of microphones built for one purpose: to catch anyone testing a nuclear weapon underwater. It is run by the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, and one of its key listening posts sits in the deep water off Cape Leeuwin, the southwestern tip of Australia. These hydrophones hang within a layer of the ocean called the SOFAR channel, found around 1,000 meters down, where the physics of temperature and pressure trap low-frequency sound and let it travel for thousands of kilometers with almost no loss. It is the ocean's long-distance telephone line. And starting in the early 2000s, the analysts listening on that line kept hearing things they could not immediately place. Recurring low-frequency signals crossing entire ocean basins with no obvious source. Over time, many of these were traced to an unexpected culprit: icequakes. The cracking, grinding, and shattering of Antarctic icebergs and ice shelves. When a colossal slab of ice fractures or scrapes along the seafloor, it sends a deep tremor radiating through the water. One famous example came from an iceberg named B-15, which broke away from the Ross Ice Shelf in the year 2000 and generated a strange harmonic tremor as it ground against the bottom. Sped up so a human can hear it, the sound is almost musical, an eerie groaning song from the bottom of the world. But here's the part that keeps this on our list. Not every pulse has been confidently assigned a source. Some remain cataloged simply as unidentified. To even attempt an answer, analysts must separate the song of cracking ice from undersea earthquakes, from the volcanic tremor along the southeast Indian Ridge, and from the calls of living animals. The harmonic repeating structure of some signals first looked almost mechanical, as if something built was making them. The deeper challenge is that the SOFAR channel scrambles your sense of place. A signal born off Antarctica can arrive thousands of kilometers north, sounding intimate and close, so analysts must work backward through the physics just to guess a direction, let alone a cause. And remember, this is a system whose entire job is to listen for the unnatural, to flag a clandestine bomb test against the roar of a living planet. If the most sensitive oceaneers on Earth still leave a fraction of their recordings unnamed, then a faint signal in the deep can fool almost anyone. Which is exactly what may have happened over the same ocean in 2014 during the most expensive search in aviation history. Number 5. The MH370 search pings. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 people, vanished on its way from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Faint automated handshakes between the aircraft and an Inmarsat satellite suggested it had ended its flight somewhere in the remote southern Indian Ocean, far west of Australia, in some of the deepest and least mapped water on the planet. The search was enormous. An Australian vessel, the Ocean Shield, was fitted with a United States Navy device called a towed pinger locator, dragged on a long cable to listen for the acoustic beacons attached to the aircraft's black boxes. Those beacons emit a ping near 37.5 kilohertz, and their batteries last only about 30 days. The clock was running. In early April 2014, the Ocean Shield detected signals. The most prominent of them came in near 33.3 kilohertz, close to the beacon frequency, but not exactly on it. The detections continued over several days. Hope surged. The autonomous underwater vehicle Bluefin 21 was sent down to scan the seabed where the pings had been heard, and the seabed there was empty. No wreckage, no debris, nothing. Investigators eventually concluded that the signals were probably not from the aircraft at all. The mismatch in frequency and the total absence of debris led them to discount the pings. Some suspected the search equipment itself or some other source had produced the sound. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau coordinated a seabed search across tens of thousands of square kilometers. Later, real debris from the aircraft did surface, including a wing flaperon that washed up on Réunion Island in July 2015 and other pieces along the western Indian Ocean. But drift analysis of those fragments pointed to a crash site nowhere near the ping coordinates. Survey ships, and later a private company called Ocean Infinity, scanned vast stretches of seafloor, and still the main wreckage was never found. To this day, the exact source of those pings has never been confirmed. They were neither proven to be the aircraft nor firmly traced to anything else. A faint sound in the deep had pulled the world's attention to the wrong patch of ocean. Sometimes, though, the deep does not hide an object. Sometimes it hides an entire floor that climbs toward the surface every single night. Number 6. The deep scattering layer. During the Second World War, sonar and echo sounder operators kept running into something that should not have been there. A second seafloor. Their instruments would report solid bottom at around 300 to 500 meters, far shallower than the chart said the real bottom should be. At first it looked like a navigational error, or an uncharted shoal, or worse, an enemy submarine lying in wait. But this false bottom did something no seafloor ever does. At dusk it rose toward the surface. At dawn, it sank back down. Every day, like a tide made of something alive. In the 1940s, researchers began to close in on the answer. A scientist named Martin Johnson at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography helped prove what it really was. In 1945, he sampled the water at night, when the layer had risen and pulled up the culprits. The false bottom was made of living creatures. We now call it the deep scattering layer. The sound from a sonar ping was bouncing off the bodies and especially the gas-filled swim bladders of countless small fish and shrimp. Those swim bladders are superb sound reflectors, dense enough to mimic solid ground. And the reason the layer moves is one of the greatest spectacles on Earth. It is the daily vertical migration of the deep ocean, the largest animal migration on the planet, happening every 24 hours. Tiny fish like lanternfish and bristlemouths of the genus Cyclothune rise hundreds of meters at night to feed in the richer surface waters, then sink back into the darkness by day to hide from predators. Bristlemouths may be the most abundant vertebrates on Earth, numbering in the hundreds of trillions. The biomass involved is staggering. Modern acoustic surveys, including the Malaspina expedition that circled the globe in 2010 and 2011, have pushed estimates of mesopelagic fish to roughly 10 billion tons and possibly far more. The migration matters far beyond sonar. As all those animals haul carbon-rich food down into the dark each morning, they help drive the ocean's biological pump, one of the planet's great systems for moving carbon out of the surface and into the deep. The depth and brightness of the layer shift with region, season, moonlight, even the amount of oxygen in the water, which is why it once seemed to behave so unpredictably on a wartime screen. So the terrifying moving seafloor turned out to be a hidden living world, so vast it reflects sound like rock, and so important it helps regulate the chemistry of the whole planet. This is the rare deep sonar mystery that was actually solved, and the answer was bigger than the fear. But for every mystery the science cracked, the people whose job was to listen still heard contacts they could never put a name to. Number 7. The GIUK Gap. Slow walkers. The GIUK Gap is a stretch of ocean between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. During the Cold War, it was one of the most important pieces of water on the planet, the doorway through which Soviet submarines had to pass to reach the open Atlantic. To guard that doorway, the United States Navy laid a vast network of hydrophones across the seafloor called SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System. Using the same SOFAR channel that carries iceberg songs, SOSUS could pick up the low-frequency hum of a submarine's machinery from astonishing distances. Skilled analysts at shore stations would study each contact and try to match its acoustic signature against a library of known vessels. Most of the time they could, but not always. Some contacts did not match anything. In Western tracking, the term slow walker came to describe a slow-moving, unidentified contact that did not fit a known signature. The phrase is most often tied to mysterious slow radar targets in the air, but the underwater world had its own category of unknowns, contacts that were clearly there, and yet matched nothing in the catalog. Several factors made this worse over time. The Soviets ran intense submarine quieting programs, especially after the Walker spy ring betrayed American tracking secrets in the 1980s, making their boats far harder to classify. And the ocean itself was full of confusion, the calls of whales, the rumble of seafloor events, and simple equipment noise. In fact, declassified material confirms that SOSUS heard far more than submarines. It heard whales, including the famous 52 Hertz whale, undersea eruptions, and signals nobody could explain. The pressure on the analysts was immense. Missing one real Soviet boat could be catastrophic, so every unidentified contact had to be taken seriously, even the ones that moved too slowly or too strangely to be a standard submarine. At shore stations known as naval facilities, teams of analysts watched paper traces scroll past hour after hour, sorting genuine threats from what they bluntly called biologics, the calls of living animals, along with weather noise and the steady drone of merchant shipping. Much of the original record remains classified or only thinly documented in public, which means independent verification of any single incident is hard. The modern descendant of SOSUS, the Integrated Undersea Surveillance System, still listens today, and it still logs contacts that go into the file unidentified. But the larger truth is not in doubt. A system built specifically to identify things in the deep routinely heard things it could not. And some of those unknown sounds would wait 50 years for even a tentative name. Number 8. The Boing. One of those sounds was called simply the Boing. For decades, submarine sonar crews in the North Pacific kept hearing a strange noise, first widely noted back in the 1950s and 60s. It had an odd, distinctive shape, a short pulse, followed by a complex, wavering tone, giving it a quality that genuinely sounds like the word Boing. And it was seasonal, heard mostly in winter and spring, returning year after year. For roughly half a century, nobody could say for certain what made it. The theories ran the full range. Some thought it might be a submarine, some thought a fish, some suspected an unknown marine mammal. The amplitude modulation, the way the sound swelled and faded, was unusual enough that during the tense years of Cold War sonar listening, it was sometimes mistaken for something mechanical, something man-made. The answer did not arrive until the year 2002. A study published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America finally pinned the Boing on a surprising source, the minke whale. Researchers cracked it by combining acoustic recordings with visual sightings during a research cruise near Hawaii, catching the animal in the act. The minke whale is a relatively small and famously elusive baleen whale, easy to miss at the surface, which is part of why it stayed hidden in plain hearing for so long. The scientists even identified two distinct types of Boing, an eastern and a central North Pacific variant hinting at separate populations. And yet, even with a name attached, the mystery is not entirely closed. The exact purpose of the call, most likely a male breeding display, is still being studied, and not every recording fits the explanation perfectly. The Boing has a sibling, too, a sound called the bioduck, heard for decades in the Southern Ocean and only traced to Antarctic minke whales in 2014. Both are reminders that a sound can be technically solved and still hold open questions about why the animal makes it at all. The arrays built to hunt submarines ended up recording the secret voices of whales. But not every contact is a sound. Some are objects hovering over churning water off the coast of California. Number 9. The USS Nimitz Tic-Tac sonar track. In November 2004, the Nimitz carrier strike group was training off the coast of Southern California, near Catalina Island. For several days before anything was seen, the Aegis cruiser USS Princeton had been tracking strange contacts on its powerful radar. The objects seemed to drop out of the sky, falling from around 80,000 feet to just above the ocean in a matter of seconds, a descent no known aircraft could survive. On November 14, 2004, 2 Navy Super Hornets were vectored out to investigate. One was flown by Commander David Fravor. What he reported has become the anchor of the modern era of these encounters. He saw a smooth, white, wingless object shaped like a tic-tac breath mint, roughly 40 feet long. And it was not just hanging in the air, it was hovering over a disturbance in the sea below it, a churning, frothing patch of water that he described as roughly the size of a Boeing 737, as if something large were just beneath the surface. That detail is why this case belongs on a list about the deep. The object in the air seemed connected to something in the water. When Fravor descended to get a closer look, the tic-tac appeared to mirror his movements, then accelerated away faster than he could follow. Moments later, the Princeton's radar reacquired it roughly 60 miles away at the exact point the jets had been told to regroup, a distance it crossed almost instantly. The infrared video shot that day, sometimes called FLIR 1, became one of 3 clips the Pentagon officially acknowledged in 2020. The churning water, though, is the unsolved heart of it. No submerged object was ever recovered or identified from that froth. This was a multi-sensor event captured by the cruiser's radar, the jet's systems, and trained human eyes at once. A 2021 government assessment listed Nimitz-type incidents among those it could not explain, and Commander Fravor testified about it before Congress in 2023. Skeptics offer radar glitches, sensor errors, or misidentified craft, but the combination of witnesses and instruments is hard to wave away. And off another coast, in colder water, fishermen swear something far larger glides beneath their boats. Number 10. The deep blue submarine shadow. Off the coast of South Africa, near Cape Town and the great cold sweep of False Bay, there is a legend that has refused to die for half a century. They call it the Submarine. Since at least the 1970s, fishermen have reported a shark of impossible size, a dark contact gliding beneath their boats far larger than any normal animal, with estimates running past 20 feet and, in the wildest tellings, approaching 30. To understand why this story has such grip, you have to know the biology. A great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, usually tops out around 6 meters, or about 20 feet. Claims of something much bigger push against everything we know. And yet the legend got a strange boost from a real animal. Her name is Deep Blue, one of the largest great whites ever filmed, estimated at around 20 feet and more than 50 years old, recorded off Guadalupe Island in Mexico and again near Hawaii in 2019. Deep Blue proved that genuinely enormous great whites do exist, which lends just enough plausibility to the giant shadow reports to keep them alive. The trouble is, the sonar itself. The fish finders and echo sounders on small boats register large dark contacts all the time, and the apparent size of a target is easily exaggerated by the geometry of the sonar cone and the depth of the water. A single big animal and a tight school of fish can produce nearly the same return. Estimating the size of a living thing from sonar is notoriously unreliable. From there, speculation runs wild, all the way to the idea that the shadow is a surviving megalodon, the giant shark that mainstream science says went extinct around 3.6 million years ago, but there is no physical evidence for any of it. No fresh teeth, no carcass, no verified measurement of anything beyond a large, great white. False Bay was once a global hotspot for these predators, famous for white sharks breaching clean out of the water near Seal Island. In recent years, a pair of orcas, nicknamed Port and Starboard, have hunted and driven white sharks out of some of these waters, which only makes the old sightings stranger to revisit. Marine biologists are clear most giant shadows are simply unusually large, but ordinary great whites, plus optical exaggeration and sonar misreads. The legend survives because the water really is cold, murky, and full of big, hungry life. The deep does not need an invented monster. The real scale is already enough. Step back from the individual cases and a single thread runs through all of them. The ocean does not show itself to us, it speaks in sound, not light, and so sonar is never sight. It is inference, a guess assembled from echoes. That is the root of every mystery on this list. Consider the SOFAR channel again, that deep layer where low-frequency sound is trapped and carried for thousands of kilometers. It means a slab of Antarctic ice cracking near the bottom of the world can arrive at a microphone off Australia sounding like something close and strange. Distance dissolves. A faraway event masquerades as a nearby anomaly. Then there are the invisible walls inside the water itself. Layers where temperature or salinity change sharply, called thermoclines, bend and reflect sound, creating shadow zones where a real object goes silent and false bottoms where empty water seems solid. The very shape of a sonar beam distorts the size of whatever it touches, so a modest target at the right depth can loom like a giant. And living things confuse everything, because a fish's gas-filled swim bladder reflects a ping almost exactly the way a hard surface does. Active sonar, the kind that sends out a pulse, can measure range and shape, but it announces your presence and provokes a reaction. Passive sonar, which only listens, can hear a whisper across an ocean but often cannot say exactly where it came from. And when a frequency is even slightly off, as with the 33.3 kHz pings in the Indian Ocean, an entire search can be led to the wrong place. The reason that so many contacts stay unidentified is not that the deep is supernatural, it is that our libraries of known sounds are small, the physics is treacherous, and detection is simply not the same thing as identification. Hearing something is easy. Naming it is the hard part. It helps to remember just how much of this listening grew out of war. SOSUS, the Cold War seabed network, evolved into the modern integrated undersea surveillance system, still wired into the ocean floor. Alongside it sits the treaty monitoring chain of hydroacoustic stations run for nuclear detection, with posts off Cape Leeuwin, Ascension Island, and Diego Garcia, straining to hear a single illegal blast anywhere on Earth. Add the autonomous hydrophone arrays deployed by ocean science agencies to catalog the natural soundscape, the towed arrays and sonobuoys dropped from ships and aircraft, and the robotic explorers, the autonomous underwater vehicles like Bluefin 21, and the tethered, remotely operated vehicles that crawl the seabed. Every one of these tools was built with a serious, narrow purpose, and every one of them keeps overhearing things it was never designed to find. The same hydrophones that hunt submarines have discovered whale songs no human had ever cataloged, undersea volcanoes erupting in real time, and the groaning tremor of icebergs grinding across the bottom of the world. That is the quiet irony of the whole enterprise. We wired the ocean to find our enemies, and instead we keep discovering the planet. But the volume of data is the problem. There is far more sound pouring in than there are analysts to study it, so a great deal of it is simply logged and shelved, never closely examined. And the most tantalizing traces are often the ones locked behind classification, where national security and scientific curiosity quietly collide. We have built ears sensitive enough to hear a continent fracture, and they still, routinely, miss the source. So why do these particular cases stay open when so many others get solved? Look closely and they fail in different ways. Some lack any preserved trace at all. The underwater tracking at Shag Harbour and the Cold War slow walkers survive mostly as testimony and thinly documented logs, impossible to re-examine now. Some lack a recovered object. Aguadilla, the Omaha sphere, and the Nimitz Tic-Tac all involve something that apparently entered or hovered over the sea, and in every case the water gave nothing back. Some are technically solved but quietly incomplete, like the Boing, whose source is known but whose purpose is not, or the Southern Ocean pulses, where many are explained as ice but a fraction are still cataloged as unknown. And some are outright false trails, like the MH370 pings, which led a search astray and still have no confirmed source. Running underneath all of them is the same cruel pattern. The ambiguity is always worse at the exact moment the evidence looks strongest, the instant of water entry, the peak of the signal, the closest approach. That is where thermal blur, sonar cone geometry, and frequency mismatch all do their damage. Add the human factors, the reluctance of institutions to put a firm label on anything uncertain, the gaps in chain of custody, the decades of secrecy, and you get cases that simply never close. It is worth being precise about language here. There's a difference between no explanation and no confirmed explanation. Most of these are the second kind. A leading theory exists for the Boing and for the Icequake pulses, but a leading theory is not the same as a closed case, and a careful analyst will say so. Honest uncertainty is not a cover-up. It is the correct scientific posture when the data runs out, and it is what separates real investigation from the urge to force a tidy answer onto a messy recording. The frustrating truth is that the same evidentiary gap which keeps a case scientifically open is exactly the gap that lets folklore rush in to fill it. What is changing is our willingness to look at this systematically in the open. In 2020, the Pentagon took the unusual step of officially releasing 3 Navy videos of unidentified objects. In 2021, a preliminary government assessment told Congress that most incidents simply could not be explained with the available data. The following year, the United States stood up a dedicated office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, to investigate these reports with real rigor. In 2023 came congressional hearings with witnesses like Commander Fravor testifying under oath and a NASA independent study panel calling for exactly what has always been missing: better data gathered by better instruments instead of chance encounters and anecdotes. At the same time, the tools for watching the ocean are improving fast. Cabled seafloor observatories run by programs like Ocean Networks Canada and the Ocean Observatories Initiative now stream continuous data from the deep. Thousands of drifting Argo floats and gliders patrol the water column, and machine learning is beginning to sort through the acoustic flood, learning to classify signals far faster than any human team. The promise is real. Better sensors may finally resolve old categories, matching a mysterious pulse to its iceberg or its whale. But they will almost certainly surface entirely new puzzles too, including the genuine physics question at the center of the transmedium cases: whether an object can truly move from air to water the way the footage seems to show, or whether our sensors are fooling us in some way we have not yet understood. There is a real prize in this for ordinary ocean science, too. The cabled observatories that now run continuously off the coasts of Canada and the United States were built to study earthquakes, tsunamis, and deep ecosystems, but the same continuous recordings give researchers years of uninterrupted sound to mine for the strange and the unexplained. An anomaly that once flashed past a single submarine in 1960 can now be caught, stored, replayed, and compared against millions of hours of other recordings. The point is not to believe every story. The point is that systematic data beats a good story every time. The ocean answers only in echoes. It never simply shows us what is there, and for a century now, our ability to detect has outrun our ability to identify. Every case on this list is really a marker on the same boundary, the line between what we can sense and what we can name. A thermal oval slipping into the Atlantic, a craft the Canadian Navy dove to find and never did, a sphere the Pentagon admits it filmed going under, a song of cracking ice that crosses an entire ocean, a ping that pulled the world to the wrong patch of sea, a false floor that climbs every night, a contact that matched nothing in the catalog, a sound that hid in plain hearing for 50 years, a tic-tac hovering over a churning water, a shadow too big to be the shark we know. What we actually possess is not a catalog of answers, but a catalog of contacts, a long backlog of sounds and shapes filed under the same quiet word: unknown. And that word is not a failure, it is an invitation. The next archive someone reopens, the next pass of an autonomous vehicle, the next algorithm trained on a decade of recordings could reclassify any one of these tomorrow. Until then, the deep keeps its backlog, humming beneath everything, in a language made of echoes that we are only beginning to learn how to read. So the next time you hear that the ocean is silent, remember, the operators bent over their screens, listening to a floor that should not move and a sound that should not be there. We are still down there, listening. And the deep is still answering in a voice we cannot yet fully understand.